There is a moment, and if you have ever been truly alone in this world, you will know exactly what it feels like, when a child stops crying for help. Not because the pain goes away, but because they have learned, through too many unanswered nights, that no one is coming. That moment is not loud. It does not announce itself. It arrives quietly, like a door closing somewhere deep inside the chest. And once it closes, the child who stands on the other side of it is not quite the same child anymore. Effiong closed that door at 11 years old, on a rain-soaked Tuesday in Seoul, crouched beneath the rusted awning of an abandoned electronics shop in Mapo-gu, watching strangers walk past him as though he were part of the scenery. He had been in Korea for 2 years by then. 2 years since the woman who brought him from Calabar had vanished without a trace, leaving him with nothing but the clothes on his back, a small wooden cross his mother had tied around his neck before he left Nigeria, and a name that no one in this city could pronounce correctly. Effiong. Effiong. His grandmother had given him that name. In Efik, it meant a gift. His grandmother used to cup his small face in her wide warm hands and say it slowly, letting each syllable land like a drop of honey. She said he was a gift from God, sent to remind their family that goodness still existed in the world. He used to believe her. He was not sure he believed her anymore. But he survived. That was the thing about Effiong that the streets of Seoul had not yet managed to erase. He survived with a stubbornness that looked almost like peace from the outside. He ran small errands for market vendors in Mapo. He carried luggage for travelers near the bus terminals. He sorted recyclables on Tuesday and Thursday mornings for a haraboji, a grandfather, named Mr. O, who paid him in warm rice and the occasional crumpled 1001 note without ever once asking for his papers. He slept in a narrow maintenance corridor behind a 24-hour convenience store whose night manager, a tired young man named Juno, pretended not to notice the folded blanket tucked behind the water heater. He did not steal. That was the rule he had set for himself, the one line he would not cross, no matter how hungry the nights became. In a world that had taken nearly everything from him, his honesty was the one thing that still belonged to him completely. And Effiong guarded it the way other boys guarded expensive phones or brand new shoes. It was a cold Thursday morning in late November when everything changed. The kind of cold that Seoul does so well, dry and sharp and absolute, the kind that slips through every gap in your clothing and settles into your bones like an uninvited guest. Effiong was walking through the underpass near Mapo-gu office station, head down, hands buried in the front pocket of his oversized olive-green hoodie, when his sneaker caught on something and he stumbled forward, catching himself against the tiled wall with both palms. He looked down. A wallet. Black leather, thick, with a silver clasp embossed with what looked like a serpent coiled around a sword. It had fallen, or been dropped, just at the edge of the underpass wall, half hidden in the shadow between a litter bin and a cracked concrete pillar. Effiong crouched down and picked it up slowly, the way you pick up something that does not belong to you. He turned it over in his hands. The leather was smooth and expensive, the kind that did not come from any market stall. He unclipped the clasp carefully. Inside, there were crisp bills, more money than Effiong had seen in one place in his entire life in Korea. Several black cards. A folded receipt. And behind a small transparent window at the back of the wallet, tucked in like it had been there forever, was a photograph. Effiong pulled it out carefully with 2 fingers. It was a woman. A black woman. She was beautiful, deep rich dark brown skin, natural hair pulled back from her face, wearing a white dress with small yellow flowers along the collar. She was laughing at something off camera, her head tilted back slightly, her eyes bright and full of a joy so genuine it almost hurt to look at. And standing beside her, stiff and unsmiling in the way of someone who has forgotten how to be photographed, was a Korean man. Tall, sharp-featured, dark eyes that even in the photo carried a heaviness that felt permanent. His hand was on the woman's shoulder. Not possessive. Careful. Like he was afraid she might float away. Effiong stared at the photograph for a long time. Then he closed the wallet, tucked it securely into the front pocket of his hoodie, and stood up straight. He had a wallet to return. If you are new to this channel, welcome to Afro Korean Love Tales, where every story is about the unexpected ways love finds people across cultures, across distance, and across everything the world tries to put between them. If this story is already pulling at your heart, please hit the like button right now and subscribe so you never miss a single episode. Finding the owner of a wallet with no name on it, in a city of 10 million people, should have been impossible. Effiong knew that. But he also knew how to read a city the way other children read textbooks, through pattern and repetition and careful attention to detail. The silver clasp with the serpent and the sword meant something. It was not decorative. It was a mark. He had seen marks like that before, on the backs of certain cars that idled too long outside certain buildings, on the wrists of men who walked through Mapo Market and made vendors go very quiet and very polite without a single word being exchanged. He asked Mr. O first, casually, while sorting recyclables the following morning. He described the clasp without mentioning the wallet. Mr. O's hands went still on the plastic bottles. He looked at Effiong for a moment with an expression that mixed recognition with alarm. Serpent and sword, Mr. O repeated quietly. Then he said nothing else for a full minute, which in itself was its own kind of answer. Shin, Mr. O finally said, his voice dropped so low Effiong had to lean in. That mark belongs to Shin Hyunsoo. You stay away from anything with that mark on it, Effiong ah. You understand me? Far away. Effiong nodded like he agreed. Then he spent the rest of that morning thinking about the woman in the photograph. The way she was laughing. The way the Korean man's hand sat on her shoulder like it was the most careful thing he had ever done in his life. He was not going to stay away. He was going to find Shin Hyunsoo and return what belonged to him. Because that was who Effiong was. Even when it was inconvenient. Even when it was dangerous. He was the boy who did not steal. And returning something lost was just the other side of the same coin. It took him 4 days to find out where Shin Hyunsoo could be found during daylight hours. It was a fish sauce vendor named Auntie Bok who gave him the final piece of information, though she did not know she was doing it. She was a small, round-faced woman who sold fermented condiments from a blue canopy stall at the edge of Mapo Market, and she had a habit of narrating everything she observed in a loud cheerful voice as though life itself were a television program she was providing commentary for. Effiong had run small errands for her on several occasions, carrying boxes, fetching change, chasing away the stray cat that had developed an obsession with her anchovy paste, and she had grown fond of him in the distracted, generous way that certain older women grow fond of stray things. On the 4th morning after finding the wallet, Effiong was stacking empty crates behind her stall when a convoy of 3 black vehicles rolled slowly down the main road that bordered the market. Every vendor in the immediate vicinity seemed to find something urgent to do with their eyes. Heads dipped. Conversations dropped mid-sentence. The usual hum of the market thinned out like air escaping a punctured tire. Auntie Bok clicked her tongue and muttered without looking up from her anchovy jars. Shin Hyunsoo's morning check. Every Friday without fail. Like clockwork, that man. Owns 3 of the buildings on this block, you know. Never comes inside the market. Just drives past slowly so everyone remembers who is in charge. She snorted softly. As if we could forget. Effiong watched the convoy from behind the stack of crates, his eyes steady and calculating. The middle vehicle, a long black car with tinted windows so dark they seemed to absorb light rather than simply block it, moved at a pace that was almost meditative. Deliberate. The car of a man who had long since stopped being in a hurry because the world had learned to wait for him. The convoy turned at the far end of the road and disappeared. Effiong straightened up and went back to stacking crates. But inside his chest, something had locked into place like a key finding its groove. Next Friday. Same road. Same time. He spent the intervening week preparing in the way that he prepared for everything important, quietly, thoroughly, and without telling a single soul. He found out from careful listening that the convoy always stopped briefly at a dry cleaning shop 3 buildings from the market corner. The owner of the shop, a nervous thin man named Mr. Beck, collected something on Shin Hyunsoo's behalf every Friday morning. The exchange took less than 4 minutes. The black car idled. One suited man went in. One suited man came out. The convoy moved on. 4 minutes. That was his window. The following Friday, Effiong was in position 40 minutes early. He stood at the mouth of the narrow alley that ran alongside the dry cleaning shop, wearing his cleanest clothes, which meant the olive hoodie had been replaced by a dark blue one that Juno the night manager had left in the convenience store lost and found box for 3 weeks before Effiong quietly inherited it. His sneakers were as clean as he could get them. He had polished them with a damp cloth that morning until the white rubber sole glowed against the gray pavement. He stood straight. That was important. His grandmother had told him once that the world treats you according to the posture you present it. Stand like you belong somewhere, she had said, and people will believe you do. He stood like he belonged on that pavement, outside that alley, in that cold November air, with a dead man's wallet in his pocket. Or not a dead man's. A dangerous man's. Which in Seoul was sometimes the same thing. The convoy arrived at 8:43 in the morning. The dry cleaning exchange happened exactly as he had observed. One suited man entered. Effiong's heartbeat was very loud in his own ears. He regulated his breathing the way he had taught himself to do on the nights when fear came for him in the dark of the maintenance corridor, slow in through the nose, slow out through the mouth, keep the body calm even when the mind is screaming. The suited man came back out carrying a slim black case. He was moving toward the car when Effiong stepped out of the alley mouth. "Excuse me." His Korean was accented but clear and grammatically careful. He had worked very hard on his Korean. "I need to return something to Mr. Shin." "It's his." The suited man stopped. He was broad-shouldered and expressionless, with the kind of stillness that comes not from calm but from training. He looked at Effiong the way people look at things that have appeared where they were not expected, not with anger yet, but with a suspended attention that could tip in either direction. "Who are you?" It was not a question. It was a flat statement that required filling. "My name is Effiong. I found something that belongs to Mr. Shin. I'm returning it. That's all." A pause. Long enough to be uncomfortable. The suited man's eyes moved over Effiong with a professional thoroughness that took in everything, the age, the dark blue hoodie, the clean sneakers, the hands visible and open at his sides, the absence of any of the signals that precede threat. "Wait," the man said finally. He went to the car. He spoke through a barely lowered rear window. Effiong could not hear the exchange. He kept his hands visible and his posture straight and his face neutral and his heartbeat entirely too loud. The rear window went back up. The suited man returned. "Give it to me. I'll pass it on." "I'd prefer to give it directly," Effiong said. "With respect." Another pause. Longer this time. The rear window came down again. The suited man went back. Came back again. "Get in." And this is the part of the story where most people, most sensible, self-preserving people, would have said thank you, handed the wallet over, and walked away quickly in the opposite direction. Effiong knew that. He was 13, not naive. He understood exactly what kind of man Shin Hyunsoo was. He understood that the black car with the tinted windows was not a safe place for a parentless Nigerian boy with no documents and no one who would come looking if he disappeared. He got in anyway. The interior of the car smelled of leather and something cold and expensive that Effiong could not name. The seats were a deep charcoal gray. The partition between the front and rear was partially open. Sitting in the far corner of the back seat, with one ankle resting on the opposite knee and a phone face down in his hand, was Shin Hyunsoo. He was younger than Effiong had expected. Perhaps 38, perhaps 40, it was difficult to tell with certainty because his face carried the kind of agelessness that comes not from good genes but from having long since stopped feeling things that mark a face. He was lean and sharp-featured, with dark hair pushed back from a high forehead and eyes so dark they absorbed the dim interior light of the car without reflecting any of it back. He was wearing a charcoal suit without a tie, the top button of his white shirt open, and on his right wrist, partially visible below the cuff, was a tattoo, a serpent coiled around a sword. He looked at Effiong with no expression whatsoever. Effiong looked back at him with no expression whatsoever. For 4 full seconds neither of them spoke. Outside the car, Seoul moved past the tinted windows in blurred silence. Then Effiong reached into the front pocket of his hoodie, pulled out the wallet, and held it out across the space between them with a steady hand. "I found this in the underpass near Mapo-gu office station last Thursday morning," he said. "I wanted to return it to you." Shin Hyunsoo did not move for a moment. His eyes dropped to the wallet. Something shifted in his face, not much, just a tightening around the eyes, a fractional adjustment that in a less controlled face would have been a flinch. He reached out and took the wallet from Effiong's hand. He turned it over. Checked the clasp. Opened it. His eyes moved through the contents with a speed and precision that told Effiong he was counting, verifying, cross-referencing against memory. Then his fingers found the transparent window at the back. He looked at the photograph for a long moment. When he looked up, something had changed in his eyes. It was not softness exactly. It was more like a crack in a wall, small, barely visible, but present. "Nothing is missing," he said. His voice was low and even, the Korean precise and unhurried. "No," Effiong said. "Nothing is missing." "Why?" Effiong understood that the question was not about the wallet. Or not only about the wallet. "Because it is not mine," Effiong said simply. "And I don't take things that don't belong to me." Shin Hyunsoo studied him for another long moment. The car moved through the city in that thick, expensive silence. Then Shin Hyunsoo said something to the driver in a low voice and the car slowed and eased toward the curb. "How old are you?" he said to Effiong. 13. "Where are your parents?" A pause. Just one beat. "My mother brought me to Seoul 2 years ago. She disappeared. I haven't found her yet." Something moved behind Shin Hyunsoo's eyes. Gone before Effiong could read it properly. The car stopped. The suited man opened the rear door from outside. The cold air rushed in. Shin Hyunsoo reached into the inside pocket of his jacket and produced a plain white business card. No name. Just a number, printed in small clean digits. He held it out. Effiong took it. "If anyone gives you trouble," Shin Hyunsoo said, "show them that." Effiong looked at the card. Then he looked up. "Thank you," he said. In Korean. Then, quietly, almost to himself, he added in Efik, the way his grandmother used to close every conversation, "Sasango. Be well." He stepped out of the car. The door closed behind him. The convoy pulled back into traffic and was gone within seconds, swallowed by the city as though it had never been there at all. Effiong stood on the pavement with a plain white card in his hand and the cold November air in his lungs and something warm and unnameable stirring in his chest, something that felt dangerously close to hope. If you are watching this right now and you felt that moment too, drop a comment below and tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Whether you are in London, Toronto, Houston, Sydney, or anywhere else on this earth, we want to hear from you. And if this story is giving you all the feelings, please share it with someone who needs something beautiful to watch today. You are watching Afro-Korean Love Tales and this story is just getting started. The white card changed things. Not dramatically, not overnight, but in the small quiet ways that matter most on the street. Effiong did not fully understand the weight of what Shin Hyunsoo had handed him until 3 days later, when 2 older boys from the underpass, boys who had made a habit of taking whatever Effiong earned from his market errands on certain evenings, cornered him behind the recycling bins on a Tuesday night. They were 17 and 16 respectively, both bigger than him, both wearing the particular expression of people who have decided in advance how a situation is going to go. Effiong said nothing. He simply reached into the back pocket of his track pants, produced the white card, and held it up between two fingers so both boys could read the number printed on it. The change was instantaneous. The older one's expression collapsed from confidence into something that looked very much like a man who has just stepped on a surface he thought was solid and found nothing beneath it. He grabbed the younger one by the sleeve and they were gone before Effiong had fully lowered his hand. He stood alone behind the recycling bins for a moment, looking at the card. Then he carefully placed it back in his pocket and went to sleep. Word traveled the way word always travels on streets that have their own invisible communication networks, fast, thorough, and without any visible mechanism. Within a week, the maintenance corridor behind the convenience store felt safer. Vendors who had previously looked through Effiong began to see him. Mr. O gave him an extra portion of rice without comment. Even the stray cat that haunted Auntie Bok's fish sauce stall, who had never once allowed Effiong to come near it, sat beside him one morning while he sorted recyclables and allowed him to scratch behind its ears. As though the world had shifted a single degree in his direction and everything in it had quietly recalibrated. But the card was not what occupied Effiong's mind in the long quiet hours of the night when the convenience store hummed and the city outside settled into its restless half-sleep. What occupied him was the photograph. The woman in the white dress with the yellow flowers. The way she was laughing. The way Shin Hyunsoo's hand sat on her shoulder with that careful, almost frightened tenderness. He thought about his own mother. Nkoyo. That was her name. Nkoyo Effiong, and she had always told him that in Efik tradition a name was not just a word but a declaration, a small prayer spoken over a child's life before they were old enough to speak it themselves. She was a tall woman, his mother, with deep rich dark brown skin and natural hair she wore in thick twisted locks that she sometimes let him help oil on Sunday mornings. She had a laugh that filled rooms completely, the kind of laugh that made strangers on buses turn around and smile without knowing why. She had brought him to Seoul on the promise of a better life, a job offer, a woman she knew from church who had said there was work and a place to stay and a future worth crossing an ocean for. And then she had disappeared, and the woman from church had disappeared, and Effiong had been left with a city he did not yet speak and a wooden cross around his neck and the door closing quietly inside his chest. He had not stopped looking for her. Not really. He had asked questions carefully, in the way that a boy without papers asks questions in a foreign city, obliquely, patiently, never drawing attention. He had described her to vendors and night workers and the occasional social worker who came through Mapo. He had stood outside the Nigerian community church in Itaewon on 3 separate Sundays, hoping to see a familiar face. He had found nothing. Not a trace, not a rumor, not a single thread that led anywhere. But Shin Hyunsoo had a photograph of a black woman in his wallet. A photograph he carried with him everywhere, behind a transparent window where he could see it without opening the wallet fully, the way you keep something close that you are afraid of losing again. Effiong was 13 and he had no power and no resources and no legal existence in this country. But he had the white card. And he had, somewhere beneath the closed door in his chest, a belief, fragile and stubborn in equal measure, that the world occasionally allowed good things to happen to people who kept choosing to be good even when it cost them. 2 weeks after the encounter in the car, on a gray December morning with the first suggestion of snow in the low Seoul sky, Effiong's phone, a cracked second-hand device Juno had given him that connected to the convenience store Wi-Fi, buzzed with a message from an unknown number. It read, "Come to the dry cleaning shop on Friday at 9. Tell Mr. Beck your name. Bring nothing. SH." Effiong read the message 4 times. Then he set the phone face down on his blanket and stared at the ceiling of the maintenance corridor for a very long time. He thought about all the reasons not to go. He was not short of reasons. Shin Hyunsoo was not a man you casually built a relationship with. The people in Shin Hyunsoo's orbit did not leave it easily. Mr. O's face when he had mentioned the serpent and the sword. The way the market vendor's eyes dropped when the convoy drove past. These were not small signals. Effiong had survived 2 years on the streets of Seoul precisely because he knew how to read signals. And yet, he thought about the photograph. He thought about his mother's laugh. He thought about the way Shin Hyunsoo had said nothing is missing and then looked at him for a long time with those dark cracked wall eyes, as though Effiong had returned something more than a wallet. On Friday morning he was at Mr. Beck's dry cleaning shop at 8:55. He told the nervous thin man his name. Mr. Beck made a phone call, spoke 2 words, and then gestured wordlessly toward a door at the back of the shop that Effiong had not previously noticed. Beyond the door was a small, clean room with a low table, 2 chairs, and an electric kettle on a narrow shelf. No windows. Good lighting. On the table were 2 cups and a plate of red bean pastries that were still warm. Effiong sat down and waited. Shin Hyunsoo arrived 11 minutes later. He was in a dark coat today, and he moved through the door with the quiet economy of a man who never wastes a gesture. He sat down across from Effiong, poured hot water into both cups without asking, and set the kettle back on its shelf. He looked at Effiong. Effiong looked back at him. "You came," Shin Hyunsoo said. "You asked," Effiong said. Something moved at the corner of Shin Hyunsoo's mouth. It was not quite a smile. It was the ghost of one, the memory of a muscle that had once known how to perform that function and was attempting to recall the sequence. "How long have you been in Seoul?" Shin Hyunsoo asked. 2 years and 3 months. "Alone?" "Yes." "You said your mother disappeared." He said it carefully, the way you say something you have been turning over in your mind for 2 weeks. "When?" "Exactly." Effiong looked at him. There was something different about this question. It did not feel like the polite gathering of background information. It felt specific. Pointed. Like a man pressing a bruise to check whether it still hurts. 2 years and 3 months ago, Effiong said. Shortly after we arrived. She went out one morning and did not come back. The woman who had arranged our travel, a woman named Mrs. Okafor, was also gone. The apartment we had been given was rented under a false name. There was nothing left. Shin Hyunsoo was very still. "Mrs. Okafor," he repeated quietly. "Yes." "Do you know her?" A pause. Long and dense and full of something Effiong could not yet name. The kettle made a small settling sound on the shelf. Outside, Seoul went about its indifferent business. "Describe your mother," Shin Hyunsoo said. His voice had dropped half a register. It was still controlled. But only just. And something in the quality of his stillness, in the deliberate evenness of his breathing, in the way his hands had gone flat against the table surface, made the hairs on the back of Effiong's arms rise slowly beneath his hoodie. Because it was not the stillness of a man who was simply listening. It was the stillness of a man who was bracing himself. Who already half knew what he was about to hear and was holding himself together with the particular rigid discipline of someone who has had long practice at not falling apart in front of other people. Effiong described his mother. Her height. Her locks. Her deep rich dark brown skin. Her laugh. The small scar on her left collarbone from a childhood fall. The way she hummed Efik folk songs under her breath when she was concentrating on something. The white dress she had worn on the day they left Calabar, with the small yellow flowers along the collar, because she had wanted to arrive in Korea looking like hope. With every detail, Shin Hyunsoo grew more still. And more still. Until by the end he was sitting across the low table like a man carved from silence, his tea untouched, his eyes somewhere far away and full of something immense that had no clean name in any language, not grief exactly, not joy exactly, but the specific agony of a wound that has been closed for a long time suddenly opening in the presence of light. He reached into his coat. He took out his wallet. He opened it to the transparent window at the back and placed it on the table between them, facing Effiong. The woman in the white dress with the yellow flowers looked up at them both from the photograph, laughing at something off camera, her head tilted back, her eyes bright and full of joy. Effiong looked at the photograph for a long time. His chest felt very tight. His hands were completely still in his lap. "That is your mother," Shin Hyunsoo said. It was not a question. "Yes," Effiong whispered. "Are you still breathing? Because we are barely holding it together over here." Drop a comment right now and tell us where in the world you are watching this from, whether you are in the United States, the United Kingdom, Canada, Australia, Germany, or anywhere else on this beautiful earth. We want to know you are here. And if this story is breaking your heart in the best possible way, please share it with someone you love right now. You are watching Afro-Korean Love Tales, and the most important part of this story is still coming. The silence that followed was the kind that fills a room completely, the way water fills a sealed container, not empty at all, but dense and pressurized and difficult to breathe inside. Effiong sat very still, his eyes moving between the photograph and the man across the table from him, trying to assemble the pieces of what he was looking at into a shape that made sense. Shin Hyunsoo knew his mother. Not knew of her. Knew her. Carried her photograph in his wallet behind a transparent window where he could see it without opening it fully. Had been carrying it, from the look of the photograph's worn edges, for a very long time. "How do you know her?" Effiong said. His voice came out quieter than he intended. Shin Hyunsoo did not answer immediately. He closed the wallet and held it in both hands on the table, looking down at it the way a person looks at an object that contains something too large for its size. When he finally spoke, his voice was measured and low and carried the particular weight of a man choosing every word with the care of someone who has kept a story locked inside for so long that releasing it requires conscious, deliberate effort. "I met your mother 4 years ago," he said. "In Itaewon. There is a small Nigerian restaurant on a side street near the Hamilton Hotel. It is gone now, closed 2 years ago, but at the time it was run by a woman named Mrs. Adichie who made pepper soup that could make you forget every bad thing that had ever happened to you. I used to go there alone on Sunday evenings. It was the one place in Seoul where none of my men followed me in. I had an arrangement with Mrs. Adichie. She kept a corner table for me. No questions. No interruptions." He paused. Outside, a bus went past, its engine a low rumble through the walls. "Your mother came in one Sunday evening with a group of women from the Nigerian church in Itaewon. They took the large table near the window. She was," he stopped. Pressed his lips together briefly. "She was the loudest person in the room. Not in an unpleasant way. She laughed and the whole restaurant shifted toward her the way plants shift toward a window. I noticed her immediately. I noticed her and then I told myself to stop noticing her because my life was not a life that had room for noticing people like that." Effiong was very still. He was listening with his whole body. "She noticed me too," Shin Hyunsoo continued. "And unlike every other person who has ever noticed me in a restaurant, she was not afraid. She looked across the room at me, a man sitting alone in the corner of a restaurant with 2 suited men outside the door, and she smiled at me the way you smile at someone who looks like they could use a friend. Just that. Nothing calculated. Nothing afraid. Just a straightforward human smile, as if we were 2 ordinary people in an ordinary place." He was quiet for a moment. "I went back the following Sunday. And the Sunday after that. Eventually she started coming to the corner table instead of waiting for me to come to her. We talked. Every Sunday for 3 months we talked. About everything and nothing. About Nigeria and Korea and what it meant to be a stranger in a place that had not asked for you. She told me about her son in Calabar. She showed me photographs on her phone. She said his name meant gift and that she intended to give him the gift of a future worth living. Effiong's throat tightened. He said nothing. I fell in love with her, Shin Hyunsoo said. Simply. Flatly. As though the sentence were a fact about the weather. I did not plan it. I did not want it. A man in my position does not get to love people without putting them in danger. I knew that. I had always known that. But your mother was, she was not the kind of person you could decide not to love once she had decided you were worth knowing. She made that decision about me in that restaurant and she never once revised it, no matter what she found out about who I was. He looked up from the wallet. His eyes met Effiong's directly. She knew what I was, he said. I did not hide it from her. I told her everything. And she sat across from me at that corner table and she looked at me with those eyes and she said that she did not believe that the worst thing a person had ever done was the full sum of who they were. She said her God was bigger than my past. She said it without flinching. Effiong felt something hot and insistent pressing against the back of his eyes. He blinked it back carefully. What happened, he said. Shin Hyunsoo set the wallet down on the table. I made a decision, he said. A decision I believed was right at the time. I had enemies, I always have enemies, that is the nature of what I am, but at that particular time there was a specific threat. A rival organization that had made it known they intended to use the people closest to me to reach me. I had already lost people that way before. I was not willing to lose her. So I ended it. Without explanation. I stopped going to the restaurant. I stopped responding to her messages. I made myself disappear from her life completely because I believed it was the safest thing I could do for her. He paused. 3 weeks later she was gone from Seoul entirely. I tried to find her. I had people looking for months. There was nothing. No trace. I believed she had gone back to Nigeria. I told myself that was good. That she was safe. That she was home. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. I have been telling myself that for 2 years. The room was very quiet. Effiong looked at the man across the table from him, this feared, powerful, dangerous man who sat in the back of black cars and made market vendors go silent and had the whole of Mapo-gu operating at a careful respectful distance, and saw with sudden, startling clarity what he actually was underneath all of it. A man who had loved someone and lost them and spent 2 years carrying their photograph in his wallet because he could not bring himself to put it away. She did not go back to Nigeria, Effiong said. Shin Hyunsoo looked at him. She came to Seoul to bring me here. To give me a better future. She arrived with me and then she disappeared. The woman who arranged our travel, Mrs. Okafor, she was not who she said she was. I think my mother was deceived. I think she was taken somewhere and I think she has been in Seoul this entire time and I think, his voice caught. Just once. He steadied it. I think she has been looking for me the same way I have been looking for her. Something happened to Shin Hyunsoo's face in that moment that Effiong would remember for the rest of his life. It was not dramatic. It was not loud. It was the quiet catastrophic shift of a man whose carefully constructed internal architecture, 2 years of telling himself a story that kept the pain manageable, had just collapsed in a single sentence. His eyes closed for 3 seconds. When they opened, they were different. Cleared of something. Filled with something else. Mrs. Okafor, he said again. Very quietly. And this time his voice carried a different quality entirely, the flat, focused calm of a man shifting from grief into purpose. Yes, Effiong said. I know that name, Shin Hyunsoo said. I did not connect it before because I did not know you were her son. But I know that name. Mrs. Okafor has operated in Seoul for several years as a broker. She brings people from West Africa on false promises and she sells their labor contracts to establishments that do not appear in any official registry. His voice was very even. Very precise. The way a blade is precise. She has been careful. She has stayed outside my direct territory. But I know people who know where she operates. Effiong's heart was beating very fast now. He kept his face still and his hands still, and only his eyes betrayed him, wide and dark and burning with something that was equal parts terror and the most dangerous thing a parentless boy could allow himself to feel. "Can you find her?" Effiong said. "My mother. Can you find her?" Shin Hyunsoo looked at him across the low table, in the small windowless room behind Mr. Beck's dry cleaning shop, with the electric kettle cooling on the shelf and the red bean pastries untouched on the plate between them. "Yes," he said. One word. Absolute and unhesitating as a door being opened. And then he said something that Effiong did not expect. Something that cracked through every remaining wall the boy had built around the closed door in his chest and let the cold December air rush in, and with it, terrifyingly, beautifully, the first real warmth he had felt in 2 years and 3 months. "And while I look," Shin Hyunsoo said quietly, "you will not sleep in any maintenance corridor. You will not sort recyclables for rice. You will not carry anyone's luggage for crumpled notes." He paused. "You are Nkoyo's son. That means you are," another pause, shorter, almost involuntary, as though the next word surprised him as he said them. "That means you are not alone in this city anymore." Effiong said nothing for a long moment. Then he reached up and closed his fingers around the small wooden cross at his throat, the one his mother had tied around his neck in Calabar before they left, the one that had survived 2 years and 3 months of sleeping on cardboard and sorting garbage and holding a closed door shut against everything that wanted to break him, and he held it tightly, and he did not cry, because the door was not open yet, not fully, not until his mother was found. But it was no longer closed. If you have ever been separated from someone you love, if you have ever spent nights wondering where they are and whether they are safe and whether they are thinking of you too, then you know exactly what Effiong is feeling right now. Tell us in the comments where you are watching from tonight and what this story is making you feel. We read every single comment on Afro-Korean love tales, and your presence here means everything to us. Please like this video, share it with someone who needs to believe in good things right now, and stay with us, because the final chapter of this story is about to change everything. The search took 11 days. Effiong knew this because he counted every single one of them, from the narrow bed in the clean spare room of a safe house in Yongsan-gu that Shin Hyunsoo's people had taken him to on the evening of that Friday meeting. It was the kind of room that people who had never had very much would recognize as extraordinary, not because it was lavish, but because it was warm, and it was safe, and there was food in the small refrigerator that nobody was going to take from him, and a lock on the door that he controlled from the inside. These were not small things. To Effiong they were enormous. He lay on that bed on the first night and stared at the ceiling and felt the strangeness of not having to calculate, not having to monitor, not having to sleep with one ear open and both hands ready. It took him 4 hours to fall asleep. But when he finally did, he slept deeply and without interruption for the first time in 2 years and 3 months. Shin Hyunsoo came every evening. Not for long. Never longer than an hour. He would arrive at 7, sit in the single chair beside the small table near the window, and give Effiong a brief factual update on the search. Then he would ask Effiong questions. Not interrogation-style questions. Careful questions, the kind that a person asks when they are trying to build a picture of someone they have missed knowing. What was Nkoyo like in Calabar? What did she cook on Sundays? What songs did she sing? What did she want for her son? What did she laugh about? Effiong answered all of it, slowly at first, and then with increasing ease, because talking about his mother made her feel less like a memory and more like a fact, present tense, ongoing, somewhere in this city waiting to be found. On the third evening Shin Hyunsoo brought a bowl of pepper soup from a restaurant in Itaewon. He set it on the table in front of Effiong without explanation. Effiong looked at it and then looked up. "Mrs. Adichie's restaurant is closed," Shin Hyunsoo said. "But her daughter opened a new one 3 streets away. Same recipe. A brief pause. Your mother said it was the best pepper soup outside of Calabar. Effiong picked up the spoon. The first mouthful hit him somewhere so deep and so specific that he had to set the spoon down for a moment and look at the wall. It tasted like Sunday mornings. It tasted like his mother humming over a pot with her locks pinned up and the kitchen windows steamed and the world outside not mattering at all. He finished the entire bowl without speaking. Shin Hyunsoo sat in the chair beside the window and said nothing and did not look away, and there was something in that, in being witnessed in a moment of grief and hunger and memory without anyone trying to fix it or minimize it or move past it quickly, that Effiong filed away in the part of himself that was always paying attention, always learning what love was supposed to look like when it was done correctly. On the sixth day, Shin Hyunsoo's people found Mrs. Okafor. She was operating out of a labor brokerage front in Dongdaemun-gu, a small office above a fabric wholesale shop with a sign on the door that advertised domestic staffing services. She had 6 women currently under her management, a word she used that meant something considerably darker than management, placed in private households across Greater Seoul under contracts they did not fully understand and could not easily leave. Shin Hyunsoo's people documented everything. Then they made several phone calls to individuals in positions of legal authority who had outstanding reasons to be cooperative with Shin Hyunsoo when he occasionally required their cooperation. Mrs. Okafor was in police custody by Thursday evening. But Nkoyo was not among the 6 women in her current operation. This was the moment, day 7, Thursday night, Shin Hyunsoo sitting in the chair with his elbows on his knees and his hands clasped and his eyes direct and honest, when Effiong felt the floor shift beneath him. He sat on the edge of the bed and he looked at the man across from him and he kept his face very still and he said, quietly, "Where is she?" "We do not know yet," Shin Hyunsoo said. "But we will." Mrs. Okafor kept records. She always kept records, people like her always do, because records are leverage. "My people are going through everything tonight. If your mother passed through her operation, her name will be in those records. And wherever those records point, we will go." "She is alive," Effiong said. It was not a question. It was the thing he needed to say out loud in order to keep the door from closing again. Shin Hyunsoo looked at him steadily. "Yes," he said. "I believe she is alive." He said it with the careful precision of a man who understood the weight of the words he was choosing, not false comfort, not empty reassurance, but a considered, deliberate belief offered honestly to a boy who deserved honesty more than he deserved comfort. Effiong nodded. He picked up the wooden cross at his throat. He held it. They sat together in the warm room in Yongsan-gu while Seoul turned cold and dark outside the window, and neither of them spoke for a long time, and the silence between them was not the pressurized silence of that first room behind Mr. Beck's dry cleaning shop. It was different now. Easier. The silence of 2 people who have told each other the true things and no longer need to fill the space with anything false. On the 9th day the records gave them a name. A private residence in Songbuk-gu, registered to a property holding company that existed on paper only, that had been receiving domestic staff placements from Mrs. Okafor's operation for 3 years. The placement that matched Nkoyo's description, entry date, and origin paperwork had been made 2 years and 2 months ago. She had been there, the record suggested, ever since. Shin Hyunsoo told Effiong on the evening of the 9th day. He told him all of it, plainly and completely, and then he said that they would go the following morning with the appropriate legal authority and that Effiong would stay in the vehicle until the situation was confirmed safe. Effiong agreed to this condition without argument. He was 13 and he was wise enough to know which battles to choose. He did not sleep that night. He lay on the clean bed in the warm room and he held the wooden cross and he talked to his mother in his head the way he had talked to her on all the worst nights of the past 2 years, telling her he was still looking, telling her he had not given up, telling her that wherever she was he hoped she could feel that he was close. He told her about Mr. O and Auntie Bach and Juno and the stray cat. He told her about the wallet and the photograph and the man who had carried her face next to his heart for 2 years because he did not know how to stop. He told her that the pepper soup was as good as she had always said it was. He told her to hold on one more morning. They left at 6:45. 3 vehicles, moving through the pre-dawn streets of Seoul with a quiet purposefulness that parted the thin early traffic like a hand parting water. Effiong sat in the back of the middle vehicle beside Shin Hyunsoo, and neither of them spoke for the entire journey, and the city slid past the tinted windows gray and cold and indifferent as always, and the wooden cross was warm in Effiong's closed fist. The residence in Mapo-gu was a large traditional hanok that had been converted into a private household staff quarters, set behind a high stone wall on a quiet residential street where the trees were bare and the morning light came in thin and pale between the rooftops. Shin Hyunsoo's people went in first, with the legal authority, and Effiong sat in the vehicle with the door closed and his heart so loud in his own ears that he could barely hear the city. He waited. 4 minutes. 6 minutes. 8 minutes that felt geological in their slowness, each second laying itself down like sediment, building into something he could not yet see the shape of. Then the vehicle door opened. One of Shin Hyunsoo's men, not the usual broad-shouldered one, a different one, younger, with an expression that Effiong had never seen on any of these men's faces before, looked in and said, simply, "Come." Effiong stepped out of the vehicle. He walked through the gate in the stone wall and across the courtyard and through a low wooden door and down a short corridor and through another door and into a small warm kitchen that smelled of rice and dish soap and something else, something underneath those smells, something that his body recognized before his mind caught up with it, something that lived in the deepest most unguarded part of his memory and had never once gone quiet in 2 years and 3 months no matter how firmly he had tried to close the door on it. She was standing at the far end of the kitchen. She was thinner than he remembered. Her locks were longer, tied back from her face with a piece of cloth. She was wearing a gray domestic uniform that was 2 sizes too large for her. There were things in her face that had not been there before, a tiredness around the eyes, a guardedness in the set of her jaw, the particular expression of a person who has survived something by becoming smaller and quieter and less visible than they naturally are. But she was standing. And she was alive. And when her eyes found him across the length of that small warm kitchen they did the thing that Effiong had replayed in his memory on every bad night for 2 years and 3 months, they went wide and bright and full of that immense uncomplicated joy that was hers alone, that no amount of hardship had managed to extinguish, and she made a sound that was not quite a word, not quite a name, just a sound that a mother makes when the thing she has been praying for without stopping has just walked through a door. He crossed the kitchen in 4 steps and she caught him with both arms and held him with the specific fierce totality of a woman who has decided she is never letting go again, and he pressed his face into her shoulder and smelled her, rice and dish soap and underneath it all still her, still entirely and completely her, and the door inside his chest that had been closed for 2 years and 3 months and 11 days opened. Not quietly this time. Wide. He did not try to stop the tears. He had earned them. Every single one. Shin Hyunsoo stood in the doorway of the kitchen and watched, and said nothing, and did not look away. And on his face, visible for perhaps the first time in longer than he could remember, was an expression that had no calculation in it and no control and no careful management of how it might appear to other people. It was open and raw and entirely human, and it was the face of a man who had spent 2 years carrying a photograph of a woman he loved and had just watched her son find her in a kitchen in Mapo-gu on a cold December morning in Seoul. He pressed the back of his hand briefly to his mouth. Then he straightened. Then he stepped back from the doorway to give them the space that was theirs. Outside, Seoul continued its indifferent business. Buses ran their routes. Vendors opened their stalls. The city did not pause or acknowledge or mark the moment in any way. But in that small warm kitchen, with the rice smell and the dish soap and the morning light coming pale through a single high window, Koyo held her son and her son held her and the wooden cross pressed warm between them like a third heartbeat, and the world, for the 2 of them, in that moment, was exactly the right size. It took 3 months to untangle everything legally. Shin Hyunsoo's people worked with immigration authorities and the Nigerian consulate and a lawyer who owed Shin Hyunsoo a favor of sufficient size to cover considerable paperwork. Mrs. Okafor faced prosecution. The women in her operation were found and assisted. Nkoyo was given legal status, a real apartment, a real job, this time at the new restaurant run by Mrs. Adichie's daughter, where the pepper soup was as good as it had always been and where she became, within 6 weeks, the person that the whole dining room shifted toward the way plants shift toward a window. Effiong enrolled in school. A real school, with a uniform and a student ID card with his actual name on it, printed correctly, Effiong, in clean black letters. He was behind academically and he worked harder than anyone in his year to close the gap, and within 1 semester his teachers had stopped feeling sorry for him and started feeling quietly astonished by him instead. And Shin Hyunsoo, feared, powerful, dangerous Shin Hyunsoo, who had long since decided that his life had no room for the kinds of things that marked a face, began to come to the restaurant on Sunday evenings again. He sat at a corner table. He ordered pepper soup. And sometimes Nkoyo would come out of the kitchen and sit across from him and they would talk the way they had talked 2 years ago, about everything and nothing, about Nigeria and Korea and what it meant to build a life in a place that had not asked for you but that had become home anyway. Effiong watched all of this from a careful distance and said nothing about it to either of them. But sometimes, on Sunday evenings, when the restaurant was warm and full and his mother's laugh was filling the room the way it always had and the man in the corner was watching her with that open, unguarded expression that had no calculation in it at all, Effiong would reach up and touch the wooden cross at his throat and think of his grandmother in Calabar cupping his face in her wide warm hands and saying his name slowly, letting each syllable land like a drop of honey. Effiong. A gift. He was beginning to believe her again. There is a lesson in this story that is worth sitting with. Honesty is not weakness. In a world that rewards cunning, the boy who refused to steal, who walked into a dangerous man's car with nothing but a wallet and his own integrity, changed the course of 3 lives. Effiong did not return that wallet because he expected a reward. He returned it because it was not his. And that one decision, made quietly and stubbornly on a cold Seoul morning, set in motion everything that followed. Every reunion. Every open door. If this story moved you, if it reminded you that goodness still exists in the world and that love finds its way across every distance this world tries to put between people, please leave a comment right now and tell us where you are watching from. Are you in the United States, Canada, the United Kingdom, Australia, New Zealand, Germany, the Netherlands or anywhere else on this earth? We want to know you are here. Share this video with someone who needs to believe in good things today. Subscribe to Afro Korean Love Tales if you have not already, because every single story on this channel is made with this same love, this same intention, this same belief that the most powerful thing in any culture, in any language, in any corner of this world, is the moment when 2 people choose each other across everything that tries to keep them apart. Thank you for watching. Thank you for feeling this with us. And as always, love finds a way.